straight into our presentation, we did want to ask you guys for 10 seconds if everybody could stand up and stretch. And keep it to 10 seconds. Stretch your legs. Okay, and once you've stretched your legs, given your hamstrings a good stretch, if you guys could take a seat again, we'll get started. So I'm Tessa Sydnor Tubbs. I'm here with my husband and my dad. And this is Grace.
I'm Grace. Nice to meet you all.
And we'll be presenting on hybridity, third space, and South Korean missionary children.
All right, how's everyone feeling? How are you doing today? So I'm a worship leader in my context. So I feel like I'm doing karaoke with this microphone, but how is everyone doing today? Good. Let's bring up the energy, and we're going to just continue with our introduction and go straight right in.
So a little more on who I am. I work for a nonprofit called Teach Beyond, and we send teachers into the whole world to do ministry through education. And a lot of our teachers staff schools, international schools, that serve missionary children. A lot of schools in Asia, there's also schools in Africa and Europe, and so I worked at the Black Forest Academy in Germany as a teacher, and I now do member care for all of our teachers around the globe. So I'm excited to get to research and present on this with Grace because missionary kids are near and dear to my heart because I worked with them, but I also am an MK. I grew up in Austria and in France, and I'm a German citizen too, so transnationalism was really interesting this morning to learn about that.
And my name is Grace Eunsun Lee. 안녕하세요. 필리핀 선교사 자녀 이은선입니다. I too am a missionary kid born and raised in the Philippines. So, kumusta po kayo to all my Filipino and Filipino brothers and sisters? Yes, mabuhay. I graduated from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary last year. That's where Tessa and I met. We had a very brief overlap. And currently, I am serving at a multi-ethnic church called Grace Chapel that is located in the greater Boston area. And before we officially begin the presentation, I want to officially thank Dr. Paul Sydnor and the GDN leadership team for this honor and opportunity for us missionary kids to have a seat at the table, literally and figuratively, and to participate in these diaspora conversations. Thank you. All right, shall we begin?
Yeah. So before we keep going, just a brief show of hands. Who here has raised children in a cross-cultural context? A lot of you guys. Okay. So hopefully this will be relevant to you regardless of what exactly we're talking about because you also have kids who grew up across the world. And that's really what we'll be talking about, even if we focus on hybridity and Asian missionary kids. So why talk about hybridity and Asian missionary kids? Well, hybridity is an important term, as you all are familiar with probably, understanding diaspora experiences of cultures, mingling and mixing. And that happens with missionary kids. Cultures come together in one person. And MKs are a diaspora in their own right. And I think often in ministry can feel overlooked. Missionary kids can feel overlooked, and that's really sad. It's important that if we're going out into the world to work with diaspora, that we also look into our own very family and home and see what's going on here and how can we reach our children. So I hope that this will be relevant to you guys as parents, but we'll be also specifically talking about this from an educator's perspective.
So we were presented with this opportunity to talk about hybridity of Asian missionary kids, and that's such a broad topic. And in light of this assignment given to us, we decided to narrow our topic based on our personal experiences as MKs. So Tessa herself is a missionary kid, and she has been a teacher for a school, for Black Forest Academy, and she is currently with Teach Beyond, which is currently continually equipping and empowering teachers to be sent out to these international school contexts. I myself, I'm an MK, but I'm East Asian, grew up in a Southeast Asian context. I studied at Faith Academy, which has historically been known as one of the biggest missionary kids schools, at least in the Asian context. So with our experiences combined, this helped us to narrow our topic and to formulate the next two questions. So the two questions here, the first one, how does the hybridity of Korean missionary kids illustrate the concept of biblical hospitality? And what is the role of foreign teachers in the international schools to better equip these Korean MKs? So we are approaching from the perspective of the teacher and the MKs.
So we'll briefly be going over these 5 portions. And before we go deeply into hybridity and biblical hospitality, just to paint the context a little bit, as we've heard this morning, a lot of statistics, a lot of graphs, a lot of fascinating information on how Asian countries are increasing in diaspora, both to other places and here. And they're sending an increasing number of missionaries, which means that an increasing number of missionaries gives us an increasing number of missionary kids that attend international schools. And these international schools in Asia, I think of 2 particularly, Faith Academy in the Philippines and Grace Academy in Thailand. They're largely staffed by North American teachers. That is changing, but it's still true today. And a lot of these are from Teach Beyond, which is our organization, my organization. And what we've noticed in my agency is that most resources available to these teachers are based on research of North American expats. And when most missionary kids were North American missionary kids, that was really helpful. But as we have an increasing number of Asian missionary kids, and specifically Korean missionary kids, we need resources that address their needs. And while a lot of those needs might overlap, there are some that are different because the context and the background is different as well.
Yeah, to add to that, we definitely want to incorporate more Asian sensitivities, like elements of honor and shame, that we find in the Asian context. How do these new, hopefully emerging resources, how will they integrate all these cultural values that are specifically reflected in Asia? And let's not forget how big Asia is. Right. We have the East Asia, South Asia, Southeast, and West, the MENA area, the Middle Eastern areas. So all in the big umbrella of Asia, how will that impact even the resources, our database for the future? Yeah. So we have this broad topic, this ambition to talk about Asian missionary kids, great, but we can go to all sorts of directions. In a sense, there's no boundaries. That's why Tessa and we decided to establish 3 goals for our paper to set the parameters. And so first, how does hybridity and third space illustrate biblical hospitality in contexts where various cultures intersect? And our second hope is that for teachers to become aware and appreciative of their role, not simply as educators who are imparting knowledge, but we hope that teachers would recognize that they themselves are disciplers who contribute to the spiritual and character formation for these MKs. And lastly, since this topic is about missionary kids, we hope to empower the Asian MKs, specifically Korean MKs, to live hospitable lives and as a ripple effect, empower others towards biblical hospitality. So I personally see points 2 and 3, 2 sides of the same coin. On one side of the coin, we aim to equip the teachers, and on the other side, we attempt to empower the MKs. And as Tessa mentioned earlier, even if you're not a teacher, we hope that you are able to contextualize this material to wherever context you are, because you're going to be interacting with the next generation. You're going to interact with cross-cultural settings and conversations. We hope that there's still something for you to take away.
Yeah, so before we go into hybridity and hospitality, just to give a little more context again on Korean missionary family, Grace is going to be sharing a lot of her research and from her personal experience as a Korean MK.
To start off, do you remember growing up and asking adults, where do babies come from? Or maybe your own children asked you the same question. Mom, Dad, how are babies created? Where did I come from? And I don't know about your experiences, but I learned about the miracle of life through reading science books, and through PE and science classes, I watched live footage of live birth taking place. And so in a similar vein, as we ask in biology class, where do babies come from? Has anyone asked you, where do missionary kids come from? How are MKs created? It may sound like a ridiculous question, especially since MKs, we generally struggle answering that question for ourselves. Where do we come from? But for Tessa and myself, as we focus this topic on Korean MKs, it was important for us to acknowledge and address the spiritual roots of the Korean MKs. To understand the spiritual roots involves studying some historical context that birthed the Korean missionary movement. I can best illustrate Korean Christianity as this vibrant stream, filled with missional fervor during the late 20th century. And from this stream, Korean missionaries were sent all over the world. And where there are missionary families, there are missionary kids. And this is a picture of my family and my 2 sisters. I know I'm surrounded by experts in the topic of Korean Christianity and missiology, so I will not attempt to overstep anyone here. But for those who are not familiar with Korean history, let me provide 2 quick summary points. The growth of the Korean church is strongly correlated and intertwined with the increase of Korean missionaries, meaning as the church growth increased in Korea, that also increased the missional movement. As TV Thomas shared yesterday, more than 30,000 missionaries have been sent out from Korea. And Dr. Timothy Keo Park, who is a senior professor of Asian studies at Fuller, he asserted that the Korean church, quote, has been a missionary church almost from the beginning, end quote. Dr. Park also comments that 1980s was a period where the Korean church changed its status. No longer was it known as the missionary receiving church. It became known as the missionary sending church, and it continues to have that reputation to this day. And while not many Korean MKs like myself may be aware of the history of Korean Christianity, this is the rich heritage that we have in our blood and in our stories. And again, this is my picture of my family, where my parents were commissioned as missionaries in 1989 with 2 daughters. I was born 5 years later. And this is my family now, where my 2 older sisters got married. My parents are grandparents. And this photo was taken in 2019, 30 years since my parents started being missionaries. And they're still in the field to this day. So this marks the 35th year.
So to dive a little more now into hybridity and biblical hospitality. So hybridity is, let me start again. So usually with missionary kids, the term that is applied to them is third culture kids. Show of hands, have you guys heard of third culture kids? Okay, so it is widely used, and that is what TCK stands for. But as we were learning from GDN and talked with several people in GDN, we were recommended to use the term hybridity because this is what's used in diaspora conversations. So we're using hybridity instead of TCK-ness, and it was a little bit of a learning curve. So if you guys have any feedback in our paper on how to improve the hybridity portion, please let us know. But as I was learning about it, I liked it because it does help tie all of us together as diaspora, because we all experience hybridity. And Homi Baba, as I was looking into him, writes about hybridity and says this about the third space. Hybridity, to me, is the third space, which enables other positions to emerge. And when we thought more about that, we just thought, this is really interesting. There's something here. Hybridity and coming together and sharing in conversation, something happens in this third space. And that really, I think, resembles what biblical hospitality does. Because when we come together and we welcome the stranger, we learn from each other. Other positions emerge. That's what third space is. And we're enriched. So that's how we got to biblical hospitality, which is really what we'll be focusing on for the rest of the paper. And here are just some pictures from my time at BFA. It really was a coming together from all kinds of cultures, over 40 countries. A lot of missionary kids were from Korea. And we really learned from each other. There was a lot of third space conversations happening. And we'll keep going now by looking a little more into hospitality.
So when we talk about hospitality, we just naturally saw, Korean culture displays a lot of hospitality. So this is kind of a quick question for y'all out there for 5-10 seconds. Feel free to share with the person next to you. How have you experienced Korean hospitality?
This is great. Good idea. You're such a good teacher.
All right, sorry, it's just meant to be a quick discussion. Can I hear some words?
Food. Yeah.
Huh? Singing.
Yeah.
The entertainment industry. Very cordial.
Yeah.
Yes. Service.
Yes.
For those who rode Korean Airlines, you know what I'm talking about, those hospitality bags, right? So yeah, we see Korean hospitality. We experience it in our everyday life. We see it in the media. And so, again, I'm preaching to the choir here. Korean culture is pretty hospitable. And I'm glad someone mentioned food, because it is true. Sharing food generously is one of the main ways Koreans display hospitality. In fact, there is a Korean saying that goes like this: 하나만 주면 정 없어. Meaning there is no 정 if I give you only one. Where if I only give you one portion of a food, there's no chong, and I'm going to explain what chong is. So again, chong is expressed in this generous giving, and we actually experienced this yesterday where we went out with Paul, Tessa's father, and we ordered 붕어빵, which is this delicious fish bread filled with red bean paste. Make sure you try some. And we ordered, the standard giving portion is 4 fish, but the owner gave us 6, 2 additional more, so that each of us could have 2 fish to share. So that was definitely a display of chong. So what is this connection of chong and food, chong and hospitality? What is chong? And for those who are Koreans, we're like, have you been given the assignment to describe what chong is? For foreigners, the best way we could describe it is that it's this complex concept, but it's to describe this level of affection you have towards someone you feel close with. You feel this closeness, and it translates into behavior, positive behavior towards the other. It's meant to strengthen that connection. And chong can be given regardless of status, of cultural background, between people of different socioeconomic status, gender, or even culture. And so these are a couple of pictures from my upbringing in the Philippines. This is lunchtime. Again, Koreans with their toshirak, with their meal box, and we're always sharing side dishes. Here, sharing fellowship with other people. This is actually Filipino food, kamayan. we had kamayan, we eat with our hands. And I won't get into it, but the reason I included these 3 photos at the bottom, these are examples where I felt chong, even from my Western friends. And I can't go too deep into it. But one is, I'll highlight one thing. The guy on the very left of the picture, he's American. His hair is naturally brown. He intentionally dyed his hair black to be able to just identify, to understand the Asian experience. I never had a friend like that, so I really wanted to highlight him. So as chong is already a part of the cultural DNA for Koreans, Tessa and I saw that chong naturally lends itself to welcoming others and hospitality. So this positions the Korean MKs to understand biblical hospitality deeply and to be able to live it out effectively.
Yeah, and as educators, as teachers, we want to take what already naturally lies dormant in our students, like the seeds we see in our students, and cultivate that. And I think that's a special calling that God gives some people as teachers. And so I was excited to learn more about chong, because that's like a seed that's already in our Korean missionary kids, in their culture. And as teachers, what would it look like to cultivate that and to show them hospitality and encourage them to show hospitality as they've already maybe naturally been gifted to? And so third space is something that, as I thought about it, I think could be really applicable to the classroom, to make conversation, to encourage conversation in a way that leaves room for the other position to emerge, that doesn't shut down other positions, but allows them to come together and learn from each other. And I think that is hospitality, that we're called to welcome the stranger, we're called to welcome the other, and we can do that in a classroom. And I talked for this paper with several of my coworkers who teach at different schools around Asia, and one couple mentioned this importance of going back to the Bible. They said, even though in our classroom we have lots of different cultures and they teach a lot of Korean MKs, when we can come back to biblical things, it goes beyond the cultures we are in. And while I thought that's really beautiful and true, we did want to highlight in our research too that culture is important to be aware of, though. As much as we can go beyond culture, we are still shaped by culture. God places us in culture, and we bring that culture to our understanding of the Bible. And so when we have third space conversations in our classroom, we need to be aware of our own culture and how that's influencing our teaching. So to illustrate that.
Yeah, we got a couple of stories from our experiences to perhaps illustrate more what does it look like when you as a teacher may have your own cultural biases that you don't recognize impacts the student, the student body. So in the Philippines, I was in my Bible class in Faith Academy, and again, this is Bible. that's important to highlight. It's Bible class. And I have a classmate who, she's Filipina, and she was sharing her testimony. There was a miracle that happened in my family, and I don't remember the details, but it had to do with her brother got healed by something. And she's like, it's a miracle. I just remember that excitement, right? And I have all of us were like, whoa, we're excited. We're like, oh, praise God. And then we have the teacher who's from America, and I just remember her response going, I'm not exactly sure I would call that a miracle. Just that face, that tone. And I remember she gave like a couple of more sentences of commentary, but it had to do more of a like scientific basis or, can we call that a miracle? ? Again, I was in high school, and I remember just growing up as an MK, I was thinking in my Asian circles or even in my Korean circles, I can talk about spiritual matters like demon oppression, about visions, miracles, dreams, angels, or something called kawi in the Korean context. It's like sleep paralysis. And I remember it's whenever I talk with my Western teachers to ask them about these things, they would be immediate to respond back with a scientific explanation. I remember growing up with that kind of confusion, but not really knowing how to articulate or express or even challenge, because it's not in the Asian way to challenge the teacher, right?
Right. And I think some of that confusion and Grace's experience of the miracle conversation in her classroom happens because the teachers are not necessarily aware of how their own culture is influencing their being and their conversations and their questions and their teaching. And so the miracle story, it was a missed opportunity. This teacher could have created third space conversation, showed hospitality by welcoming her students' other understanding of this event, asked questions. She could have opened the floor up to the students, which is called the Socratic method, if any of you is familiar with that. I talk about that a little bit in the paper. She could have used that to encourage conversation and maybe to say, maybe I can learn something from my students even. So when we're engaging in cross-cultural teaching and conversation, it's so important to be self-aware and humble as teachers as well, even if we're working with children who are younger than us. So one example that happened to me to illustrate this a little further was that I also had a conversation with a student along these lines when I was teaching. I was having lunch in my classroom in Germany, and my student, who was a missionary kid from Jordan, his parents worked in Jordan, he came and just wanted to have lunch with me. And we were just chatting, and he was telling me about his experience growing up in Jordan. He was a 15-year-old, and he was just telling me about how every morning he would wake up and his parents had to drive him to school, but the car wouldn't start because there was a demon on their car. And the demon just kept the car from starting. And I had to go, inwardly, I was like, whoa, wow, oh my goodness, what do I do? Probably this was just like a lemon, a car that was a bad car that just needed to be taken to the shop. But I didn't say that because I realized in that moment, this is actually pretty significant. His experience, his understanding of spirituality, of the Lord, of Scripture, is a little bit different from mine. Is there something I can learn from him? I'm curious. Let me be curious. Let me ask questions. And so that led to just some more fruitful conversation, and for me, actually being challenged in my own understanding of spirituality, and particularly in the supernatural. So that was kind of an example of third space happening, where I left it open for him to come and offer more, and that allowed another new position to emerge and for my understanding to grow. So we focused on hospitality for missionary kids because we really think that it addresses some of the identity conflict, identity questions that missionary kids wrestle with. I think all diaspora wrestle with probably at some point. And everybody just wants to belong somewhere. This is so true for missionary kids. And hospitality, being welcomed, leads to belonging. And belonging enables missionary kids to accept their story and accept where God has placed them. And this acceptance allows them to participate in God's story, where he has already uniquely equipped and placed them. And there's a lot of potential in missionary kids to go out and do the work that their parents have done and continue that legacy.
So with the last 5 minutes given to us, unfortunately, we won't be able to go deep, but this concept on hybridity, we had a lot of offline conversations about what do we think about this, and that's why we titled this section, Let's Talk, and honest thoughts from the MKs. But we're just going to highlight a couple of points and then go straight to our conclusion.
Yeah, so the hybrid perspective is widely employed in diaspora circles, but as MKs, somehow we found ourselves struggling with the term, and we really, both of us, kind of identify with being a TCK. So now hearing hybridity, I was challenged to wonder why is this hard?
And likewise, I was introduced to the term TCK in high school, and I remember when someone introduced me, I felt seen. I finally felt like, oh, I belong somewhere. I've been given identity. In fact, last week I went to Thailand to attend this conference called Arise Asia, and in side conversations, even 2 people mentioned, oh, you're an MK. My children, when they felt identification with TCK, like there's just this strong affirmation, we love the term TCK. And again, this is not the experience for all MKs, but there's something here that there's something here that we don't want to miss out. We just want to recognize this terminology has been very liberating and empowering to us.
Best I can explain it for myself is that hybridity is such an inclusive term, and that's its strength. But third culture kid, it identifies how we're different. And I think as diaspora, you want to belong, but you also want to be recognized that you've had experiences that are just not the same as everything else.
So again, TCK term is not ideal, and we're open to explore hybridity, what more possibilities, no pun intended, can emerge from all this. But again, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Can we have all this in the conversation?
Yeah. So to conclude, the 3 things that I came away with from doing this research that I'm so grateful I had the opportunity to do, and I hope you guys will remember, is that these third space conversations, this term that Homi Baba talked about, is really interesting. And I think it describes what happens when 2 different positions come together. And I think it's what happens when we welcome the stranger. And we're called to welcome the stranger. Matthew 25, welcome the stranger. All sorts of scripture. It's all over the Bible. We're supposed to welcome and love the stranger. And in doing so, we help people belong. And people want to belong. Ultimately, they're longing for the kingdom of God. And we can show little glimpses of that here through these things. And that's exciting.
And in the context of Korean missionary history, the foreign missionaries, they played a part. They helped the Korean church leaders become aware of their missional responsibility. And I feel like in a similar vein, Western teachers also share this role for these international school contexts to empower the MKs to know about their missional responsibility. I'm grateful to all my teachers during my years in Faith Academy. These are the pictures I just dug up the other day. We have people from Canada, from USA, Australia, New Zealand, all in this collage. But these teachers, they were fulfilling the Great Commission by discipling us MKs. And this brings me to want to reiterate, yes, we are using this post-colonial concept of hybridity to further explain the missionary kid experience. And the more we researched about hybridity, we were quite inspired and hopefully divinely inspired that this third space is actually hospitality at work. And that got us really excited because we studied at seminary and we really care about spiritual formation. And we just want to stress this biblical hospitality is a discipleship issue. We're not just here about education, imparting knowledge, but no, this is about how are we becoming more like Christ and how are we empowering the next generation to also become like Christ. And so to conclude, I just heard a definition of partnership last week by Andrew Kirk that says, within world Christianity, partnership expresses a relationship between churches based on trust, mutual recognition, and reciprocal interchange. And I'm thankful that through Tessa, this is the product of our third space conversations that we get to share in this partnership. And that brings me hope for the future of maybe future missional endeavors, MK Care. Maybe these possibilities will result because of collaboration. And could this be the glimpse of the present and future of diaspora missions? Thank you.
Thank you.